Ireland has seen its share of infamous criminals, gangsters whose names instill fear and whose deeds have become underworld legend. In this countdown, we journey through the dark world of Irish organized crime, profiling 10 of the most notorious gangland figures to ever operate on Irish soil. From brutal enforcers to elusive kingpins, each of these gangsters left a bloody trail in their rise to infamy. We'll start at number 10 and work our way to number 1, moving from the least notorious, relatively speaking, to the most feared and infamous gangster in Ireland. Get ready for a deep dive into Ireland's criminal underbelly, a story of power, violence and betrayal, but grounded in real events. At number 10 is Robbie Lawler, a name that became synonymous with ruthless violence in the late 2010s. Robbie Lawler was a Dublin-born gangster who gained notoriety as an enforcer in a vicious gang war known as the Drogheda feud. By the end of his short life, Lawler was feared even among fellow criminals for his brutality and willingness to cross any line. Robbie Lawler had a long criminal record from a young age, over 100 convictions by the time he reached his 30s. He grew up in Dublin's rough neighborhoods and quickly graduated from petty crime to more serious offenses. He was known to Garda as a hardened criminal involved in armed robbery, drug dealing and violence. Lawler was in and out of prison throughout the 2010s, but incarceration did little to temper his brutality. Every time he returned to the streets, trouble followed. The Drogheda feud. Lawler became deeply involved in the Drogheda feud, a gangland conflict that erupted around 2018 in the town of Drogheda, north of Dublin. This feud was between two rival criminal factions vying for control of the local drug trade. Lawler aligned himself with one side and quickly proved to be a merciless hitman in the conflict. He is suspected of multiple shootings and assaults as part of this gang war. One particularly notorious incident occurred in 2018. A Drogheda gang boss named Owen Maguire was shot multiple times in an attempted assassination, leaving him paraplegic. Years later, in court documents, Robbie Lawler was named as the gunman who carried out that assassination attempt. This attack was an opening salvo in what would become an increasingly savage feud. A gruesome revenge, the murder of Keane Mulready Woods. Robbie Lawler's most infamous crime, and the one that shocked Ireland to its core, was the murder of 17-year-old Keane Mulready Woods in January 2020. Mulready Woods was a teenager associated with the rival gang in the Drogheda feud. Lawler, seeking revenge for an earlier insult and assault, set his sights on the young man. Just weeks before, Lawler himself had been humiliated. He was beaten and mugged by a group of teens linked to the rival faction, allegedly including Mulready Woods. The youths even stole Lawler's gym bag and flip-flops, later posting pictures on social media wearing those flip-flops, a bold taunt directed at Lawler. Enraged and intent on sending a message, Lawler plotted a retaliation so horrific it made national headlines. In a cruel twist, Keane Mulready Woods was lured into a trap. Lawler and his accomplices brutally murdered the teen in a Dublin house. The violence didn't end there. The killers dismembered the victim's body in a gruesome act of mutilation. Body parts were packed into sports bags and dumped in different parts of Dublin as a warning. In one bag left in a rival gang's territory, the killers chillingly included a pair of flip-flops, a sick reference to the earlier mugging and a clear sign that Robbie Lawler had gotten his revenge. The level of brutality in this murder was almost medieval, and it sent waves of horror and revulsion throughout Ireland. Here was a gangster so vicious that even other hardened criminals were taken aback by the ferocity of his crime. The murder of a teenager in such a grisly fashion was a turning point. The public, the media, and law enforcement all focused their attention on taking down those responsible. Lawler went into hiding, knowing that not only were the Garda after him, but he had also painted an even bigger target on his back for his enemies. By this point, even longtime underworld figures were reportedly disgusted by Lawler's act, and he had a long list of enemies seeking vengeance. A dead man walking, Lawler's assassination. In the first months of 2020, Robbie Lawler was essentially a marked man. He moved carefully, aware that retribution could come at any moment. Garda officers warned him explicitly that his life was in danger, but Lawler, brazen as ever, continued to operate as if untouchable. On April 4, 2020, fate caught up with him. Lawler travelled from Dublin up to the Ardoyne area of Belfast, Northern Ireland, possibly thinking he could collect on a drug debt or liaise with criminal contacts there. It turned out to be a deadly miscalculation. In the late morning, as he stood in the front garden of a house in Belfast, a gunman approached and opened fire at close range. Robbie Lawler was shot multiple times and collapsed, dying there on the spot in a pool of blood. The assassination was as swift as it was unsurprising. Many had predicted Lawler would meet a violent end. In fact, when news of his death filtered back to Dublin, some social media videos even showed locals in certain neighborhoods cheering and celebrating that Lawler was gone. He had made so many enemies that his murder was practically greeted as the removal of a scourge from the community. In the aftermath, authorities suspected that gunmen linked to the rival faction in the Drawheader feud had coordinated with other criminals to set Lawler up. It's believed Lawler was lured to that Belfast house under false pretenses, possibly on the promise of money, and then executed. Several men were later arrested in connection with the killing. It appeared to be an orchestrated hit, quite possibly sanctioned by multiple figures who wanted Lawler dead. His murder even raised concerns that the Limerick gang, led by the McCarthy-Dundon crime family, which we'll encounter later in this list, had assisted in the operation, indicating how far-reaching Lawler's grudges extended. Robbie Lawler's reign of terror lasted only a few years, but the brutality of his crimes ensures his place among Ireland's most notorious gangsters. He embodied the worst extremes of gangland violence. Lawler was suspected in multiple murders, including the killing of 2 other men in Dublin, Kenneth Finn and David Lynch, prior to the teen's murder, and countless beatings and shootings. Yet in the end, this feared enforcer became a victim of the same underworld violence he once dealt out. His story is a cautionary tale of the gangland cycle, a man who lived by the gun and died by the gun. Robbie Lawler's death temporarily cooled the Drawheader feud, but the scars of his actions, especially the horrific murder of a teenager, remain fresh in Ireland's collective memory. He may not have operated on the same international scale as some higher-ranked gangsters on our list, but for sheer savagery and notoriety within Ireland, Robbie Lawler earns his spot as number 10. Coming in at number 9 is Freddie Thompson, infamously nicknamed Fat Freddy. Don't let the seemingly playful nickname fool you. Freddie Thompson is a violent mobster whose criminal career spans 2 decades of bloodshed. Thompson was a key figure in not just one, but 2 major gangland feuds in Dublin, and his ruthless ambition eventually landed him behind bars for life. Early days and rise in Dublin's underworld. Freddie Thompson was born in inner-city Dublin in 1980 and grew up in the tough streets of the South Inner City, the Maryland area. By his teens, Thompson had already come to the attention of Garda for typical juvenile crimes like car theft, but it wasn't long before he graduated to more serious ventures. In the 1990s, the heroin trade and organized crime were on the rise in Dublin, and Thompson was eager to make a name for himself. He found his opportunity amid the turbulent gangland scene of the early 2000s. Thompson became associated with the criminal network of Kinahan, a crime boss we'll hear more about later. In fact, when Kinahan was imprisoned in the late 1990s, the young Freddie Thompson helped manage some of the Dublin operations of that gang. This apprenticeship under an experienced crime family gave Thompson valuable connections and experience in the drug trade and in gang warfare. The Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, Freddie Thompson truly rose to prominence during a violent turf war in the mid-2000s, known as the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud. This was a bitter conflict between 2 factions of a once-united drug gang in South Dublin. One faction was led by Thompson, and the rival faction was led by his one-time friend turned enemy, Brian Rattigan, nicknamed King Rat. Starting around 2000, a disagreement over a failed drug deal and missing money ignited a cycle of tit-for-tat attacks between the 2 sides. The Crumlin-Drimnagh feud spiraled into a years-long vendetta on the streets of Dublin's South Inner City. Drive-by shootings, beatings, petrol bomb attacks, and murders became all too common in the neighborhoods of Crumlin and Drimnagh. Thompson, as one faction leader, barely survived several attempts on his life. Likewise, Thompson's own crew targeted Rattigan's associates relentlessly. The feud claimed multiple lives. The exact body count is at least a dozen over several years, though exact figures vary. At the height of this feud, Thompson developed a reputation as one of the most aggressive gang leaders in Dublin. He was known for being constantly surrounded by a band of loyal and heavily armed associates. In 2005, after two of his close allies were gunned down, Thompson fled Ireland to lay low in the Netherlands for a while, a common move for Irish gangsters when things got too hot at home. He was arrested in 2006 in Dublin with a haul of cocaine and firearms, 7 kilos of cocaine and several pistols, but managed to beat those charges in court, walking free in 2007. His luck wouldn't hold out forever, but in those years Thompson seemed untouchable. International links and more feuds, Thompson's criminal exploits weren't confined to Ireland. He became an international player, spending time on Spain's Costa del Sol, a haven for many Irish and UK criminals, and forging alliances abroad. Notably, he maintained his connection with the Kinahan Cartel, a powerful Irish-led drug trafficking organization based in Spain. Freddie was effectively the Kinahan gang's man on the ground in Dublin for a period, especially as the Kinahan's feud with the Hutch gang, more on that later, heated up. Thompson also managed to entangle himself in yet another feud in 2007-2008, this time with a faction of the Irish Republican paramilitaries, the Inlay, Irish National Liberation Army. A volatile Inlay member, Declan Duffy, had personal beef with Thompson, and their conflict led to a few violent incidents. The pressure from multiple enemies, Rattigan's crew, the Inlay, and constant police attention meant Thompson spent the latter 2000s frequently slipping out of Ireland to avoid being killed or caught. During one of his absences, his cousin Liam Byrne took on a larger role in the gang's Dublin operations, cementing the Thompson-Byrne family ties within the Kinahan network. By the 2010s, Thompson's original feud had largely died down. Brian Rattigan was jailed in 2003 and later convicted of murder while behind bars for a hit he ordered on a Thompson associate. With Rattigan off the streets and many lieutenants from both sides either dead or imprisoned, the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud petered out. But a new, far more lethal feud was on the horizon: the war between the Kinahan cartel and the Hutch family. Freddie Thompson would find himself drawn right into the center of that storm, the Hutch-Kinahan feud and murder conviction. In 2015, open warfare broke out between the Kinahan cartel, led by Christy Kinahan's family, and the Hutch gang, led by Jerry the Monk Hutch. Freddie Thompson, as a known Kinahan operative, became involved on the Kinahan side. This feud would become Ireland's deadliest gangland conflict, with at least 18 lives taken in a hail of revenge killings. Thompson's role was that of a trusted Kinahan hitman and organizer on the ground in Dublin. He was under surveillance by police during this time, as everyone knew he was a key player. In 2016, Thompson was linked to a high-profile feud murder, the brazen daytime killing of a man named David Douglas in central Dublin. Douglas, a seasoned criminal himself, was aligned with the Hutch side. On a July afternoon, Douglas was shot multiple times outside a shop. The murder was caught on CCTV and was clearly a professional hit. Investigators soon honed in on Thompson as one of the orchestrators of the assassination. It took some time, but Fat Freddie Thompson was arrested and charged with the murder of David Douglas. The trial that followed was a showcase of Garda intelligence on the Kinahan mob. Evidence showed how Thompson and a crew of hitmen stalked Douglas in the days prior, used burner phones, getaway cars, and all the typical trappings of a gangland hit. In August 2018, Thompson was found guilty of murder. It was a landmark conviction. Thompson became the first high-profile cartel member to be put away for life in the Hutch-Kinahan feud. In court, the portrait that emerged was of a man who had lived and breathed gangland life since he was a teenager, a mobster who rose through the ranks via violence and intimidation. Thompson, then in his late 30s, received the mandatory life sentence. As the verdict was read, he showed no remorse, staring blankly. The end of the road for one of Dublin's most notorious gang leaders. Today, Freddie Thompson sits in Ireland's maximum security Portloy's prison, serving life. Reports say he's a marked man even behind bars, needing protection from rival inmates due to the many enemies he made. Outside prison, the world he once terrorized has moved on. His old foe, Brian Rattigan, was released from prison in recent years, but the feud that consumed their youth is history. The Kinahan-Hutch feud also has died down significantly, in part due to key players like Thompson being taken out of circulation. Freddie Thompson's criminal saga is a window into Dublin's gangland evolution, from neighborhood turf wars to international cartel conflicts. He was a street-hardened thug who relished the gangster lifestyle and paid for it with his freedom. While not as wealthy or powerful as some higher-ranked criminals, Thompson's longevity in gangland and his central role in two deadly feuds make him one of Ireland's most notorious gangsters. The nickname Fat Freddy is almost darkly comic given the fear he instilled. He will likely spend most, if not all, of the rest of his life in a prison cell, a fate many feel is well deserved for a man who spilled so much blood on the streets of Ireland. For number 8, we turn away from Dublin to Ireland's Midwest, specifically the city of Limerick, which unfortunately became infamous in the 2000s for gangland violence. Wayne Dundin is a name that Limerick residents came to know and fear during those years. As the leader of the McCarthy-Dundin gang, Wayne Dundin orchestrated a bloody feud and terrorized his community, earning a reputation as one of Ireland's most notorious gang bosses. The Limerick feud. Background: Limerick City's gang scene was dominated by a few extended families, and by the turn of the millennium, tensions between them exploded into violence. On one side was the McCarthy-Dundin clan, led by brothers like Wayne, Desi, and John Dundin, alongside their McCarthy relatives. On the other side were rival families, such as the Keane Colopy gang. Starting around the year 2000, tit-for-tat attacks between these factions escalated into what became widely known as the Limerick feud. This wasn't just a personal spat. It was organized crime warfare, drug turf disputes, personal vendettas, and battles for dominance in Limerick's underworld. And at the helm of the most feared group stood Wayne Dundin. Wayne Dundin grew up in Limerick's south side, in the Ballinacurra Western area, a tough neighborhood that became the epicenter of the gang's power. By his early 20s, Wayne had already served time. He spent part of his youth in the UK, even getting jailed there for a spell. He returned to Limerick and, alongside his brothers and cousins, began building a criminal enterprise. Drug dealing, extortion, armed robbery, intimidation, the McCarthy-Dundin gang excelled in all of it. Wayne, stoutly built and intimidating, had no qualms about using extreme violence to settle scores or scare the community into silence. During the peak of their reign, early to mid-2000s, the Dundin gang turned parts of Limerick into a war zone. They were known to drive through rival neighborhoods, firing shots into houses, or to brutally assault anyone who crossed them. They extracted protection money from businesses and individuals. Witness intimidation was their specialty. If a member of the gang was arrested, woe betide any local who dared testify against them. This climate of fear made police work in Limerick incredibly difficult for a time. Many people were simply too terrified to speak up, which emboldened the gang even further. Under Wayne Dundin's leadership, the gang's violence increasingly targeted not just rival criminals, but also innocent civilians who got caught in the crossfire or incurred their wrath in some way. This callousness toward innocent life particularly horrified the Irish public. Murders of innocents. 3 high-profile murders of completely innocent Limerick citizens are linked to the McCarthy-Dundin gang, illustrating the gang's brutality. The murder of Brian Fitzgerald, 2002. Brian Fitzgerald was a nightclub bouncer, an ordinary man with no criminal ties. He had ejected a relative of the Dundins from a club one night. In retaliation, gang members, acting on Wayne Dundin's orders, shot Fitzgerald dead. The killing of a civilian over a trivial insult sent a chilling message across Limerick. No one was safe from the gang's terror. The murder of Shane Gagan, 2008. Perhaps the most tragic case of mistaken identity in the feud. Shane Gagan was a 28-year-old rugby player, beloved in the community, totally uninvolved in crime. One night, a Dundin hit team went out hunting a rival gang member. In a horrific mix-up, they mistook Shane for their target and gunned him down outside his home. The community was devastated. Shane's murder became a rallying point for Irish society to demand an end to the carnage. The murder of Roy Collins, 2009. Roy Collins was a business owner in Limerick. His family's only crime was standing up to the Dundins. Years earlier, Roy's father, Steve Collins, had testified in court against one of Wayne Dundon's brothers, after the brother had threatened Steve's daughter with a shotgun in an amusement arcade dispute. The Dundons swore revenge for that testimony. In 2009, they fulfilled that threat. Roy Collins was shot dead in broad daylight at his family's business, on Wayne Dundon's orders. It was pure retaliation against a family that dared go to the police and courts. The murder of Roy Collins, another completely innocent man, highlighted how monstrously lawless Wayne Dundon had become. He was willing to murder a civilian to send the message that nobody informs on the Dundons. These killings of non-Gangland people were a turning point. The public outrage was immense. It was clear that Limerick's gangs had gone out of control, and the government and law enforcement intensified efforts to smash the Dundon gang for good. The years around 2010 saw the noose tightening on Wayne Dundon and his cohorts. A major Garda operation with specialty units and the National Criminal Assets Bureau poured resources into Limerick. Importantly, a few courageous individuals from within the gang's ranks and associates turned informant, so-called supergrasses. They provided key testimony linking the Dundon leadership to murders. One by one, the dominoes fell. Desi, Wayne's brother, was convicted of murder in 2005 for killing a rival gang member. John Dundon, another brother, was later convicted and given a life sentence in 2013 for ordering the murder of Shane Gagan, the innocent rugby player. Testimony from former associates was crucial in that trial. Wayne Dundon himself faced multiple charges. In a show of defiance, even while in prison on other charges, Wayne allegedly continued to direct gang operations via smuggled phones. But the law caught up fully when he was tried for the Roy Collins murder. In 2014, Wayne Dundon was convicted of orchestrating Roy Collins's assassination, alongside the hitman Nathan Killeen who carried it out. The verdict was guilty, and Wayne Dundon received life imprisonment. By the mid-2010s, the top tier of the McCarthy-Dundon gang was behind bars for life, effectively decapitating the gang's leadership. With the main Dundons locked up, Limerick's years-long feud finally simmered down. Locals, who had once lived in fear of even saying the Dundon name out loud, breathed a little easier. Wayne Dundon's reign in Limerick earned him comparisons to a Mafia godfather in the Irish press. Though he lacked the sophistication of an Italian Don, his style of leadership was sheer intimidation and violence. He ruled through fear, and in the end it was fear within his own ranks and some sense of justice in former comrades that caused insiders to flip on him. Today, Wayne Dundon sits in prison, and reports say he has caused trouble even behind bars, attempting hunger strikes, stirring up fights, anything to assert power where he can. But his empire is shattered. Limerick's streets are markedly safer now than during Wayne Dundon's heyday. Still, the story of Wayne Dundon is a stark reminder of how a determined gang with a ruthless leader can hold an entire city hostage. For about a decade, Limerick's criminal underworld was personified by this man and his family. That's why Wayne Dundon is recognized as one of Ireland's most notorious gangsters, not just for his personal deeds, but for the Gangland civil war he commanded that left many dead and a city in terror. 7. Eamon the Don Dunn, public enemy number 1, and the Gangland boss who met a gangland end. At number 7 on our list stands Eamon Dunn, ominously nicknamed the Don. In the late 2000s, Eamon Dunn rose to become Dublin's most feared gangland boss, linked to an astonishing number of murders as he ruthlessly consolidated power. His underworld career was short but incandescent, burning hot with violence until he too was violently taken off the board. At the time of his death in 2010, Dunn was Ireland's public enemy number 1, a mobster whose bloody ambition knew no bounds. Humble origins to a life of crime, Eamon Dunn was born in 1976 and grew up in Cabra, a working-class district on Dublin's north side. Unlike many gangsters, he actually finished high school, completing his leaving certificate exams, and even had legitimate jobs in his youth. He worked in a meat wholesale business and later as a taxi driver. But these normal beginnings belied a darker path. By his mid-20s, Dunn was drawn into the orbit of established criminals. He became a protege of a major Dublin drug trafficker named Martin Marlowe Hyland. Under Marlowe Hyland's wing, Throughout the early 2000s, Dunn learned the trade under Hyland's gang, which was involved in large-scale drug dealing, cocaine, cannabis, and robberies. Dunn wasn't particularly notorious yet. In fact, Irish newspapers couldn't legally name him for some years due to cases in progress, so they dubbed him the Don as a pseudonym in crime reports. He first came to wider Garda attention in 2002 when he was caught during a raid in a house full of cocaine and ecstasy. Later, he was arrested with a man bound and gagged in the trunk of his car, a sign even then that Dunn was willing to deal with people brutally. But the real turning point came in late 2006. Marlowe Hyland, Dunn's boss, was assassinated by his own associates, and rumor had it that Dunn was involved in setting up his mentor's death. With Hyland gone, a power vacuum emerged in the gang. Eamon Dunn seized the opportunity. He swiftly took control of Hyland's crew and territory, proclaiming himself the new kingpin of North Dublin's drug trade. From 2007 to 2010, Dunn's reign was characterized by extreme violence. In under 3 years, he was linked to 12 to 17 gangland murders. The numbers vary, but the consensus is well over a dozen. Why so many killings? Dunn was eliminating anyone who threatened his empire, rivals, suspected informers, even his own associates if he sensed disloyalty. He had inherited a ready supply of foot soldiers and hitmen from the Highland days and used them liberally. Notable hits attributed to the Don include the murder of a former associate who he suspected of cooperating with police, hits on members of a rival faction from the South Inner City. He even partnered with Fat Freddie Thompson's gang on at least one murder, uniting North and South Side criminals in a common cause of bloodletting. Organizing the assassination of a Latvian woman, Biba Saulit, in 2006, this murder was particularly shocking. She was a mother of 2 involved in a custody dispute with an ex. That ex had criminal ties and allegedly asked Dunn's gang to kill her. Dunn obliged, showing his willingness to act as a mercenary killer. Each murder bolstered Dunn's aura of invincibility and fear. By 2009, the media was openly calling Eamon Dunn the country's most dangerous criminal. Yet, frustratingly for law enforcement, they couldn't pin charges on him for the murders. Witnesses were scarce or terrified, and Dunn was cunning in covering his tracks. He lived relatively modestly for a gang boss, perhaps to avoid undue attention. However, he wasn't shy about mingling with other criminals and living the nightlife. Ironically, it was this social nature that led to his downfall. The assassination, murder in a pub. By early 2010, Eamon Dunn must have felt on top of the underworld, but he also grew increasingly paranoid, with good reason. He often donned body armor and rotated through multiple phones and cars. Garda heard rumors that even his own allies were unsettled. Dunn's unpredictability and habit of killing anyone he distrusted meant no one around him felt truly safe. There were murmurings that some of his closest lieutenants might preemptively move against him before he decided to turn on them. On the night of April 23, 2010, Eamon Dunn attended a birthday party at a pub in Cabra, his home turf. One might think the Don would keep a low profile, but here he was, relaxing among friends and associates, even his 17-year-old daughter present at the party. Perhaps he let his guard down in what he thought was a secure environment. That proved to be a fatal mistake. As patrons sang "Happy Birthday," a hit team moved in. In a well-planned attack, 2 gunmen entered the pub and swiftly approached Dunn. Before anyone could react, they opened fire at point-blank range. Eamon Dunn was shot multiple times in the head and upper body, collapsing to the floor. Pandemonium erupted in the pub as people dived for cover. In the chaos, the killers slipped away into the night. The Don was dead on the scene, executed in front of his horrified daughter and dozens of witnesses. The murder of Eamon Dunn was like something out of a mob movie, the kingpin taken out at a celebration. But this was real, and it sent shockwaves through Dublin's underworld. Who ordered the hit? Speculation was rife. Perhaps criminal rivals seized the chance to eliminate Dunn, figuring it was now or never. Perhaps, more poignantly, his own inner circle had decided Dunn's paranoia and tyranny were going to eventually target them, so they struck first. Indeed, subsequent investigations suggested former close associates were involved in planning his demise, confirming that he truly had alienated everyone around him. No one has ever been convicted for Eamon Dunn's murder, a testament to the Underworld code of silence and the intricate planning that likely went into the hit. But Garda indicated they had intelligence pointing to other Gangland figures who benefited from Dunn's removal. His death potentially prevented even more bloodshed, as there were indications Dunn had a hit list of targets he intended to eliminate. His own death probably spared some of those lives. The fallout from Dunn's assassination was actually a strange sigh of relief in some quarters. For years, he had been the spectre looming over Dublin gangland, seemingly untouchable by law due to lack of evidence and unstoppable in ambition. With him gone, a major source of violence was extinguished. Crime reporters noted that the rate of gangland murders dipped in the immediate aftermath, as one of the most aggressive players was now removed. Eamon, the Don Dunn's legacy is that of a man who embodied the "live by the sword, die by the sword" adage. He clawed his way to the pinnacle of Dublin's underworld by making himself the most feared man in the city. Yet, in doing so, he sowed the seeds of his own destruction. Those he didn't kill were ultimately the ones who conspired to kill him. By age 34, his story was over, a meteoric and bloody career ending in a hail of bullets. To this day, Dunn's criminal run is studied as a case of how a single individual can drive a huge amount of gangland activity in a short time. His nickname, the Don, proved apt, as he styled himself like a Mafia boss. But unlike the fictional Don Corleone, this Don's rule was brief and fueled by sheer terror. For being the underworld king of Dublin and public enemy until his dramatic demise, Eamon Dunn firmly earns his place among Ireland's most notorious gangsters. 6. Thomas Slab Murphy, the phantom godfather of the borderland's shifting gears. Number 6 on our list is a very different kind of gangster. Thomas Slab Murphy is not a Dublin street hood or a flashy drug gang boss. He's something of a legendary figure from Ireland's border region. A man who straddled the worlds of paramilitary activity and organised crime. Often called the richest and most powerful Irish gangster you've never seen, Slab Murphy ran a smuggling empire from his farm on the remote South Armagh border, thumbing his nose at authorities for decades. His story is one of secrecy, influence, and the blurry lines between political violence and pure criminal profit. Thomas Murphy, born in 1949, hails from a rural community that spans the border of County Louth in the Republic of Ireland and County Armagh in Northern Ireland. The nickname Slab reportedly came from his younger days, possibly referencing a stout build or an incident. One infamous story is that he got the nickname due to a habit of dropping concrete slabs on the legs of those who crossed him, though that tale might be more myth than fact. Murphy grew up during the tumultuous times of the Troubles, the sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland. He became involved with the Irish Republican Army, IRA, specifically the Provisional IRA in the 1970s. In Republican circles, Murphy was highly respected. He was a committed IRA man, eventually believed to have risen to the role of IRA's Chief of Staff in the 1990s. As a guerrilla strategist, he was known for his cunning and for keeping a very low profile. No interviews, rarely any photographs. But alongside the ideological battle, Murphy was also instrumental in building a vast financial network for the IRA. This is where his gangster attributes come in. Smuggling kingpin, South Armagh, where Murphy's farm is located, was often nicknamed Bandit Country by the British Army due to heavy IRA activity. It was also smuggler's paradise, with winding country lanes perfect for moving contraband across the border undetected. Slab Murphy excelled in this arena. Over the years, he allegedly made millions upon millions from smuggling goods of all kinds. Fuel, diesel, laundering and smuggling, avoiding UK taxes by bringing fuel over the border, or laundering agricultural diesel to sell as regular fuel, a hugely lucrative scam. Cigarette and alcohol smuggling, again playing off the price differences and tax regimes across the border. Illegal livestock and grain deals, anything that could turn a profit moving between jurisdictions. Weapons importation. As an IRA leader, Murphy was also heavily involved in importing guns and munitions for the organization's armed campaign. This arguably was more political than personal profit, but it used the same underworld networks. By the 1980s and 1990s, Murphy's operations were raking in cash. He and his brothers quietly amassed properties and businesses, not just locally but internationally. He was said to own or control pubs, trucking companies, real estate and more, often in other people's names. The money flowing from crime was used to fund IRA activities, but also investigators believed to line Murphy's own pockets. The British and Irish authorities were well aware that Murphy was a major smuggler and the financial brain of the IRA. But getting evidence against him was another matter. Locals in his border community were extremely loyal or fearful. Nobody talked about Slab. He cultivated an image of a simple farmer, despite the fact that he was effectively living like a shadow millionaire. He also had powerful protectors. As a key IRA figure, Murphy was shielded from scrutiny by the Republican movement. After the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, when the IRA's war wound down, there were whispers that Slab Murphy was against the peace, but he never openly split. Instead, he seemed to focus on his enterprises. Publicly, Sinn Féin politicians, like Gerry Adams, would defend Murphy, calling him a good Republican and dismissing accusations of criminality as smears. This political cover made tackling Murphy even harder for law enforcement. In 2005, the BBC broadcast an Underworld rich list, naming Slab Murphy as one of the UK and Ireland's wealthiest criminals, estimating his fortune at up to 40 million. This brought Murphy into the limelight as a bona fide gangster figure in the public eye. It also embarrassed authorities by highlighting how such a man had never been brought to justice. Raids and investigations. Throughout the 2000s, cross-border police cooperation ramped up to nab Slab for anything. In 2006, a massive raid on Murphy's farm and properties was conducted by Irish Garda and British Customs agents simultaneously. They found underground bunkers, hidden ledgers, wads of cash, and evidence of fuel laundering operations. Notably, they found a secret concrete bunker believed to have been used for IRA interrogations, a sign of Murphy's dual role as insurgent and crime boss. Tons of documents and computers were seized. Murphy, of course, denied everything, famously stating he was just a farmer and had not a penny to his name. The pressure was building. Murphy had already lost some money in earlier settlements. In 1990, he actually sued a British newspaper for libel when they called him a smuggler, and he won a settlement. Bold move, but it worked then. However, times had changed. The Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, in Ireland, created in the wake of other gangland crimes, set its sights on Murphy's fortune. Legal reckoning, tax evasion trial. Finally, after years of gathering evidence, Irish authorities decided to prosecute Thomas "Slab" Murphy for something very mundane: tax evasion. It's a strategy reminiscent of how American authorities nailed Al Capone. When more serious crimes can't be conclusively proven in court, go after financial crimes. In Murphy's case, despite living lavishly, he hadn't filed any income tax returns for years, maintaining he had no income. The state said otherwise. In 2015, Slab Murphy was put on trial in Dublin's Special Criminal Court, a non-jury court used for organized crime and terrorism cases. The charges that he failed to furnish tax returns and thus evaded taxes on substantial income over about 8 years. The evidence included records of large sums moving through bank accounts linked to him and property assets clearly beyond the means of a small farmer. Murphy, now in his late 60s, sat quietly through the trial. He was found guilty on all counts of tax evasion in December 2015. The following February 2016, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. A relatively short sentence, many felt, given his lifetime of suspected criminality, but it was the maximum for the tax charges he faced. As he went to prison, it was a symbolic moment. The untouchable IRA godfather was finally in a cell. Slab Murphy served his time, reportedly in not too harsh conditions, given his age and status, and was released, likely in 2017. In the years since, he's maintained a low profile back at his farm. However, authorities didn't stop at the jail sentence. They have been working to confiscate Murphy's assets. He was ordered to pay millions in unpaid taxes and interest, and various properties linked to him in England and Ireland were seized. What makes Thomas "Slab" Murphy one of Ireland's most notorious gangsters? Unlike others on this list, he wasn't a man spraying bullets on city streets or having public showdowns. Instead, his notoriety comes from longevity and elusiveness. For over 30 years, he was a ghostly presence. Everyone knew he was a big crime boss, yet he evaded conviction time after time. His smuggling and racketeering likely injected tens of millions worth of illegal goods into the black market. Few, if any, Irish gangsters amassed a fortune comparable to Slab's. Paramilitary connection. His high rank in the IRA gave him a peculiar aura. To some in his community, he was a guerrilla hero. To others, a ruthless racketeer. Possibly, he was a bit of both, being labeled one of the richest criminals by a major broadcaster and being singled out in confidential diplomatic cables. WikiLeaks documents once quoted Irish officials calling him as bad as a Colombian drug lord, cemented his infamous reputation. Murphy's case also underscored the blurred lines between politics and crime in Ireland's recent history. It raised uncomfortable questions. Did the peace process years allow certain former paramilitaries to morph into pure gangsters unchallenged? Slab was often at the center of that debate. In any event, Thomas "Slab" Murphy's story stands out in the pantheon of Irish crime. He was the shadowy smuggler king, operating from a rural stronghold, untouchable for so long, yet finally brought low by the taxman. While he might not be as publicly flashy as others on this list, his impact and legend in Ireland's underworld are immense. Thus, he comfortably sits among the country's most notorious criminal figures. 5. Martin the General Cahill, the mastermind of mayhem and Dublin's legendary crime boss. At number 5, we have Martin, better known by the moniker the General. If one were to write the book on Irish gangland folklore, Martin would command an entire chapter. Ireland's most famous crime boss of the 1980s and early 1990s. A man whose audacious heists, quirky personality, and eventual violent end have become the stuff of legend. He was equal parts folk hero and villain in the public imagination, a criminal mastermind who thumbed his nose at the authorities and got away with it for years, until karma, in the form of an assassin's bullet, caught up with him. Martin was born in Dublin in 1949, one of a dozen children in a poor family. He grew up in the slums of the city and turned to theft at a young age to survive, honing his skills as a burglar. By the 1960s and 70s, Cahill had built a reputation in certain circles as an expert thief and a clever operator who was extremely careful. He married a woman named Frances and, interestingly, maintained an unusual family arrangement. He also lived with Frances's sister and had children with both sisters. This unconventional domestic life was just one aspect of Cahill's unique character. Cahill's nickname, the General, was originally a journalistic conceit to avoid libel by not naming him directly, but it fit him well. He ran his crew of criminals with military-like planning and precision. He was meticulous in plotting crimes, scouting targets for months, and drilling his team on plans. Martin orchestrated some of the most brazen and lucrative robberies in Irish history. A couple of his greatest hits: the O'Connor's Jewelers Heist, 1983. Martin's gang pulled off an astounding robbery of a high-end jewelry and gold merchants in Dublin's Harold's Cross. They bypassed advanced alarms and made off with over $2 million worth of jewels and gold, a fortune in 1983. The heist was so devastating that the jewelry company went out of business and over 100 jobs were lost. This massive score put the General firmly on the map and in the sights of the police, and also allegedly the IRA. We'll get to that. The Rusborough House art theft, 1986. In one of the most famous art heists ever in Ireland, Cahill's crew stole 18 paintings from Rusborough House, the stately home of Sir Alfred Beit. The stolen art included works by old masters like Goya, Vermeer, Rubens, and Gainsborough, valued at many millions. It was a sensational crime, fine art theft on a scale Ireland hadn't seen. While some paintings were recovered in subsequent years, and some thieves caught, others remained missing for a long time. Cahill himself was never conclusively tied to the planning in court, but it's widely believed to have been his operation. Media persona and outlaw image. As these crimes piled up, Martin Cahill became a sort of Irish celebrity outlaw. The press reported breathlessly on the General's exploits. Cahill, for his part, despised the media and police attention. He famously hated being photographed. In every published photo of him, he's seen covering his face, sometimes with his hand, a hat, or even by wearing odd disguises like plasters, band-aids on his fingertips to avoid leaving prints and to cover distinguishing marks. Once, when reporters lay in wait to snap his picture, he mooned them. That cheeky defiance only boosted his legend. Cahill had a bit of a Robin Hood aura in his own community. He wasn't known to deal drugs, similar to Jerry Hutch in that sense, and supposedly shared some spoils with neighbors, cultivating goodwill. However, make no mistake, he could be vicious. He was suspected in the bombing of a detective's car in 1982. The detective lost his legs. It was thought to be revenge for police harassment. He also allegedly commissioned attacks on the homes of officials and lawyers who crossed him. The general did not shy away from using violence against those he perceived as enemies or informers. Clashes with the IRA, one fascinating and ultimately fatal aspect of Cahill's career, was his run-ins with the Irish Republican Army. The IRA in Dublin at the time ran extortion rackets and had a rule that major criminals should kick up a percentage of profits to them, seeing themselves as the authority. Cahill despised the IRA's demands and refused to pay protection. That created bad blood. Furthermore, at least one of his big scores, the Rusborough paintings, indirectly involved the IRA. Why? Because some stolen art ended up in the hands of the IRA as part of a negotiation to fund arms, a convoluted saga where they tried to trade paintings for weapons or cash, as has been reported. It's believed Cahill double-crossed or angered them in these dealings. The IRA also had another grudge. Among the Rusborough Hall was a painting by Johannes Vermeer called Lady Writing a Letter. This painting belonged to Sir Alfred Beit, who after the theft offered a reward. The IRA Army Council reportedly was concerned that one of their own might give up information for the reward, so they pressured Cahill to return that particular painting. It was eventually recovered in 1993 under mysterious circumstances. The whole episode made Cahill a thorn in the IRA's side. By the early 90s, Irish police were fed up with Martin. Despite multiple arrests, the general often beat the charges or got light sentences. His clever intimidation of witnesses and ability to cover tracks stymied cases. The government formed the Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, in 1996, largely to target drug lords after the murder of journalist Veronica Guerin. But ironically, CAB's first high-profile focus earlier was Martin Cahill's wealth. In the mid-90s, they pursued him for unpaid taxes on the grounds that his lavish lifestyle betrayed huge illicit income. This legal and financial squeeze was making life harder for Cahill, but it wasn't what did him in. On August 18, 1994, Martin Cahill, then 45, left the home of one of his sisters in the affluent Ranelagh area of Dublin, where he had been hiding out. He got into his car, a white Subaru, to drive away. At a stop sign, a gunman suddenly appeared and fired several shots through the driver's window, hitting Cahill. The general managed to clamber out of the car, but collapsed on the pavement. He died moments later from the gunshot wounds. The assassination was shockingly efficient, a classic Gangland hit. Within hours, the Provisional IRA claimed responsibility for Cahill's killing. In a statement, they said they executed him because he had been involved in anti-Republican activities, likely referring to his refusal to pay them off, and possibly his interactions over the art and other rackets. Essentially, they cast him as a criminal who crossed the wrong people. Many in Ireland were stunned. Some didn't know whether to applaud or condemn. Here was a man who had been a pain for law enforcement, now eliminated by paramilitaries taking extrajudicial action. It raised all kinds of debates about vigilantism and the IRA's reach. The murder case was never formally solved by police, but its accepted IRA members carried it out. Legacy in pop culture. Martin Cahill's story didn't end with his death, it only grew. He became immortalized in books and film. The most famous portrayal is the 1998 movie The General, directed by John Boorman, with actor Brendan Gleeson delivering a magnetic performance as Cahill. The film won awards and introduced international audiences to the legend of Martin Cahill. People were fascinated by this mischievous criminal genius who ran rings around the Garda and lived by his wits. Cahill's nickname lives on in Dublin. Even today, older folks recall the daring of the general. But it's a mixed memory. Yes, he never dealt heroin or cocaine, sparing him some public hatred reserved for drug dealers, but he did wreck livelihoods with his thefts and wasn't above injuring innocent people who got in his way. He kept the police busy for decades, constantly embarrassing them. In fact, after his death, it emerged that some Garda had been just minutes away trying to tail him that day. The general eluded them one last time, only to fall to a different enemy. In sum, Martin Cahill earned his notorious status through brains, boldness, and a flair for the dramatic in his crimes. He's perhaps the most storied gangster in Irish history. You might say he was the gentleman thief turned ruthless boss, depending on whose perspective you take. Either way, the general's name is cemented in Irish crime history, making him an easy pick for this top 10. 4. John Gilligan, the drug baron. Who took on a journalist, and the state breaking into the top 4 is John Gilligan, a man whose name is forever linked with one of Ireland's darkest chapters, the murder of journalist Veronica Guerin. Gilligan was a major drug trafficker in the 1990s who built a multi-million-pound criminal enterprise from scratch. His vicious response to media scrutiny and the subsequent crackdown changed Ireland's fight against organized crime forever. John Gilligan was the face of 1990s Gangland, greedy, ruthless, and ultimately brought to heel by the system he once evaded. From petty thief to drug lord, John Gilligan was born in 1952 in Dublin. He had a rough upbringing. Stories describe his father as a violent alcoholic and a childhood marred by poverty. Gilligan turned to petty crime early, and by the 1970s and 80s, he was involved in burglary and theft. In fact, at one point, Gilligan was an associate of Martin Cahill's crew, taking part in warehouse heists and robberies around Dublin's M50 motorway. He did a stint in prison in 1990 for those robberies. That ironically set the stage for his drug empire. Upon release in 1993, Gilligan decided to go big into the booming drug trade. Ireland's economy was growing in the 90s, and sadly, so was drug demand, especially for cannabis, ecstasy, and later heroin and cocaine. Gilligan started comparatively small, smuggling contraband cigarettes to make money. Then he used those proceeds to jump into cannabis trafficking. He was street smart and cautious, organizing a crew of lieutenants to handle various aspects of the business. By the mid-90s, Gilligan led a well-oiled narcotics smuggling network. These were not street corner dealers. They were organized, bringing in tons of cannabis resin by the container load through Irish ports, distributing wholesale and raking in fortunes. It's estimated that in a couple of years, Gilligan's gang imported drugs worth over 150 million, a staggering amount. Gilligan himself lived ostentatiously off the proceeds. He bought a lavish ranch-style property called Jessbrook, complete with an equestrian center. He loved horses and show jumping. He drove flashy cars and basically taunted the law with his high-flying lifestyle that far exceeded any declared income. This ostentation caught the attention of not just police, but a particular journalist who decided to ask some pointed questions. Veronica Guerin was a brave and tenacious crime reporter for the Sunday Independent newspaper. By 1994-95, she was investigating the big drug gangs flooding Dublin with narcotics. Gilligan, rising in wealth and brazenness, came under her radar. Guerin started publishing stories hinting at a then-unnamed crime boss living in Clover outside Dublin. Gilligan suspected he was the target, and he was not one to tolerate such prying. On September 13, 1995, Veronica Guerin drove to Gilligan's equestrian ranch Jessbrook to confront him directly, an audacious move. She asked him about his luxurious lifestyle and how he paid for it. Gilligan snapped. In a violent rage, he physically attacked Guerin, savagely beating her up. He punched her, kicked her, and reportedly even threatened to kill her son if she ever wrote about him. Guerin left bloodied and shaken, but defiant. She filed a police complaint, and Gilligan was actually charged with assault. However, while awaiting trial for that assault, he was free and stewing. Guerin, undeterred, continued her reporting. She had already been previously shot in the leg in 1994 by an unknown assailant, likely another criminal's warning, and had her home shot at, yet she persisted in exposing the underworld. Tragically, Gilligan and his gang decided to permanently silence Veronica Guerin. On a June day in 1996, Guerin was driving back to Dublin from a court appearance, ironically related to a separate libel case involving another criminal. As she stopped at a red light, a motorcycle with two men pulled up alongside her car. The passenger, dressed in a tracksuit, stepped off and fired 6 shots through her window at point-blank range, killing Veronica Guerin in broad daylight. Ireland was stunned and horrified. A mother, a journalist who had become a folk hero for standing up to thugs, was assassinated on the streets near the nation's capital. The assassination was a turning point for Ireland. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, and the government reacted swiftly with new draconian measures to tackle organized crime. The Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, was one such measure, allowing the state to seize assets of suspected criminals without a criminal conviction using civil standards of proof. Laws were tightened so that even membership in a criminal gang could incur serious penalties. Now, at that moment, Gilligan made a run for it. Sensing the net closing, he fled Ireland in July 1996, hopping around Europe. But in October 1996, he was dramatically arrested at Heathrow Airport in London with cash in multiple currencies totaling around $500,000 on him, likely his emergency stash. He was extradited back to Ireland to face the music. Justice catches up. John Gilligan was put on trial not for murder. The evidence tying him personally to ordering Guerin's murder was murky enough that prosecutors prioritized other charges, but for drug trafficking and running a criminal enterprise. In 2001, he was convicted of importing commercial quantities of cannabis resin and got a whopping 28-year sentence, one of the longest ever handed down in Ireland at that time for drug offences. It was later reduced to 20 years on appeal, but still, Gilligan would spend a long time behind bars. As for Veronica Guerin's murder, other members of the gang were pursued. Notably, Brian Meehan, Gilligan's right-hand man, was convicted in 1999 for the murder based on evidence that he was the motorcycle driver for the hitman. He received life in prison. Patrick "Dutchy" Holland, long suspected as the actual shooter, was acquitted due to lack of evidence. He died in 2009, always denying involvement. John Traynor, the double dealer who may have set Guerin up by luring her to Gilligan, fled to Spain. Charlie Bowden and Russell Warren turned state witnesses, supergrasses, and got immunity for their info on the gang. Their testimonies were key in convicting Meehan and others. Gilligan, however, was acquitted of ordering Guerin's murder due to lack of direct evidence, tying him to instructing the gunman, a point that still irks many as it's widely believed he was behind it. Regardless, he was effectively neutralized with the lengthy drug sentence, and all his flashy assets, the mansion, the ranch, were seized by the state. Astonishingly, John Gilligan eventually walked free. In 2013, after serving 17 years, he was released from prison. Ireland often grants remission for good behavior. By then, the crime landscape had changed. Gilligan was a bit of a ghost of the past, but danger still loomed for him. He had old enemies. Within months, assassins targeted him. In 2014, intruders broke into a house where Gilligan was partying and shot him multiple times, including once in the chest and leg. Gilligan miraculously survived this attempt on his life. Many suspected it was retaliation from rival gangsters or remnants of his own gang for various grudges. Wisely, Gilligan left Ireland afterwards. He moved to Spain, blending into the expatriate Costa del Sol crowd where many Irish and British criminals hang out. Yet he couldn't stay out of trouble. In 2020, Spanish police arrested Gilligan and some associates for allegedly running a modest drug trafficking operation and peddling guns, including deactivated vintage guns. He was now nearly 70, seemingly unable to fully retire from crime. In 2023, he stood trial in Spain. Interestingly, he escaped a heavy outcome as Spanish courts acquitted him of serious charges, convicting him only on a minor charge of smuggling prescription drugs. Basically, he and his pals had shipped some potent sleeping pills to Ireland. He got a suspended sentence and a small fine, a far cry from the life he once led. John Gilligan's notoriety stems not just from his crimes, but from the national trauma of Veronica Guerin's murder and the sweeping changes it spurred. He was the first major drug godfather in Ireland to face the full wrath of the state post-Guerin. The cab's aggressive asset seizures of Gilligan's property sent a loud message to criminals that their money was no longer safe. The image of his prized Jessbrook estate being taken and later repurposed, it was eventually sold and, at one point, even earmarked to become a police training centre, was a symbolic victory for law enforcement. In Irish true crime lore, Gilligan is often painted as the ultimate villain, a crude, violent man who attacked a female journalist and arrogantly thought he could get away with murder. His own words in court and interviews showed zero remorse. He infamously cursed out the special criminal court judges at his sentencing and continued to deny any guilt for Guerin's death, even blaming the police and others. Yet, had he not targeted a journalist, one wonders if he'd have simply quietly made his millions and faded. In trying to silence truth, Gilligan ensured his own downfall and ironically turned Veronica Guerin into a martyr whose death greatly improved Ireland's fight against organized crime. For all these reasons, his drug empire, his brutal decision to attack press freedom, and the lasting legacy of his case, John Gilligan stands as one of the most notorious gangsters Ireland has ever seen. 3. Jerry the Monk, Hutch, the elusive heist mastermind and feud flashpoint. Entering the top 3, we meet Jerry Hutch, often called the Monk. He's a figure who has loomed large over Ireland's underworld for decades, from the high-stakes armed robberies of the 1980s and 90s that made him rich, to the lethal Gangland feud of the 2010s that put him back in headlines. Jerry Hutch is notorious both for his criminal ingenuity and for his ability to keep a low profile, hence the pious nickname, at least until an all-out war with a rival cartel dragged his name into the spotlight. The Monk, origins of the nickname, born around 1963, Gerard Hutch grew up in Dublin's inner city, in the tough neighborhood of the North Wall. He fell into petty crime as a kid, stealing fruit from stalls, etc., and graduated to burglaries and joyriding. He spent time in youth detention. Sometime in the 1980s, after stints in prison, Hutch claimed to have found a form of inner peace. He stopped drinking, smoking, and generally avoided the flashy drug-fueled lifestyle common to gangsters. His clean-living, calm demeanor earned him the ironic nickname, the Monk. It wasn't that he was saintly, far from it, but he was disciplined, patient, and shunned excesses that could make him sloppy or draw attention. Hutch's rise to infamy came from a series of spectacular armed robberies. In the late 1980s, Ireland was hit by a spate of meticulously planned heists targeting banks, armored cash vans, and jewelers. These jobs were pulled off with military precision, often involving stolen cars, disguises, and getaway routes planned down to the second. They netted huge sums. One oft-cited figure is that Hutch's gang stole an estimated $40 million in total over about 8 years of robbery sprees. That might be an exaggeration, but certainly Hutch made millions. One famous robbery was the 1987 theft of $1.7 million from a Brinks Allied security van near Dublin. At the time, one of the largest cash robberies in Irish history. Another was a theft of around $3 million in banknotes from a cash depot. Hutch was suspected to be the mastermind behind these, though he was smart enough that for a long time nothing stuck to him. He built a tight crew, sometimes referred to as the Hutch Gang, and also was rumored to invest his takings in legitimate businesses to launder the money. The media got wind of Hutch's success, and by the early 1990s, he was being dubbed Ireland's most successful bank robber. He brazenly took the Irish state to court in the 1990s, claiming harassment, and even won a settlement at one point. There's truth is stranger than fiction for you. The police had to pay damages to Hutch for unlawful detention. He also successfully sued newspapers for libel when they called him a gangster before any conviction, a tactic he learned from watching Martin Cahill's libel suits. Eventually, the Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, set its eyes on Hutch, believing he had undeclared wealth from robberies. In 1999, Hutch agreed to a settlement of $0.2 million, roughly equivalent to what they thought they could prove in unpaid taxes on his presumed robbery income. This was essentially an admission that he had profited mightily from crime. But notably, it also bought him a sort of peace. After paying that lump sum, Hutch publicly claimed to be retired from crime, and indeed through the 2000s, Jerry Hutch lived quietly. He ran a legitimate limousine and taxi service. He portrayed himself as an ex-criminal gone straight, often citing how he never got into drugs and discouraged his community's youth from doing so. Locals saw him as a sort of Robin Hood figure who gave back at times, sponsoring local youth clubs or charities. If our story ended there, Hutch would be remembered as the monk who outsmarted the system and walked away rich. But then came the feud, one of the deadliest Ireland has seen, and Hutch was thrust back into the fray. Enter the Kinahan-Hutch feud. In the 2010s, the Irish crime landscape became dominated by a powerful drug cartel run by Kinahan and his sons. More on them soon. The Kinahan gang was expanding and absorbing smaller outfits. Hutch's own nephews, Gary Hutch and Gareth Hutch, got involved with Kinahan's operations in Spain. For a while, things were fine. There was even friendship between the Hutch and Kinahan factions. Freddie Thompson, the gangster we discussed earlier, was a cousin of Hutch's family and a lieutenant for Kinahan, for example, making Hutch and Kinahan worlds somewhat connected. However, around 2014-2015, a rift formed. There were disputes over money, an allegation that Gary Hutch, Jerry's nephew, had ratted or skimmed cash. The Kinahan leadership ordered Gary Hutch to be killed. In September 2015, in Marbella on Spain's Costa del Sol, Gary Hutch was chased and murdered by a hitman linked to the Kinahans. This was essentially the spark that lit the fuse of a feud. Jerry the Monk Hutch, who had largely been out of the game, was suddenly drawn back in, fueled by grief and anger. Gary was like a son to him. Despite being in his 50s and supposedly retired, Jerry Hutch was not going to take that loss quietly. Over the next few months, associates of the Hutch family struck back. There were attempts on Kinahan members in Spain. One failed attempt on Daniel Kinahan's life occurred, but missed him. Tensions mounted. Then came February 5, 2016, the Regency Hotel attack in Dublin, a day that shook Irish Gangland to its core. A weigh-in for a boxing match, connected to a Kinahan-backed boxing promotion, was taking place at the Regency Hotel. Armed gunmen, including two dressed in fake SWAT-style police uniforms and carrying AK-47 rifles, stormed the event. In the chaos, they targeted Kinahan gang members. David Byrne, a top Kinahan associate, was shot dead, and others narrowly escaped. Daniel Kinahan himself was present and fled, barely avoiding death. The audacity, gunmen impersonating police, attacking in a crowded hotel in broad daylight, was unprecedented. The Kinahans blamed the Hutch faction for this daring hit. Indeed, it was widely assumed this was Jerry Hutch's counterpunch for his nephew's murder. Whether Hutch himself was present at the Regency attack is disputed. Prosecutors alleged he was involved in planning and even identified by some as one of the disguised gunmen, though that remains legally unproven. But certainly it was done on behalf of his side. With the Regency bloodshed, a full-blown feud erupted on Dublin's streets. The Kinahan cartel went on a revenge campaign. Over the following months, in 2016-2017, Kinahan hit teams killed multiple people linked to the Hutch family. Jerry's own brother, Eddie Hutch Sr., was murdered at his home. His nephew and Gary's brother, Gareth Hutch, was shot dead in his apartment parking lot. Friends and associates of the Hutches were picked off one by one. Some even tangentially related individuals fell victim. Hitmen, often young lads dressed in women's wigs as disguises or working in teams, turned Dublin into a killing field. In total, at least 18 lives were lost in the Hutch-Kinahan feud, the Kinahan side suffering a few, like David Byrne, etc., and the Hutch side bearing heavy losses among extended family and friends. Jerry Hutch, meanwhile, went to ground. He fled Ireland, moving across Europe, reportedly spending time in Spain's Costa del Sol, in mainland Europe, and even in Turkey, trying to stay ahead of Kinahan assassins and eventually international law enforcement. For several years, the monk was a fugitive, wanted not only by the Kinahans, but by Irish police for the Regency Hotel attack. In 2021, Spanish police arrested him on a European warrant. Hutch was extradited back to Ireland to stand trial at the Special Criminal Court for the murder of David Byrne, the man killed at the Regency. The trial in late 2022 and early 2023 was a media spectacle. One of Hutch's former friends turned informant testified against him, This man, Jonathan Dowdall, a one-time local politician, claimed Hutch had confessed to him about being involved. Dowdall himself had helped the hit team with logistics. However, Hutch maintained his innocence, claiming he was not even at the hotel and had no part in the killing. In April 2023, Gerry Hutch was acquitted of the murder charge. The judges felt the witness evidence was not reliable enough and that there was reasonable doubt. After over 2 years in custody during the trial, Hutch walked free. At 60 years old, the monk stepped out of court a free man, famously getting into a taxi. Reporters snapped photos of him looking calm and collected, as always. But he also stepped into uncertain territory. As a high-profile target of the Kinahan cartel, he likely still faces danger. As of now, Hutch's future is unclear. Some say he may leave Ireland permanently to live out his days quietly abroad, if possible. The feud has died down significantly, partly due to heavy policing, and partly because the Kinahans themselves are under massive international pressure, as we'll discuss with them next. There are rumors of peace talks, or at least a ceasefire between the remnants of the Hutch group and the Kinahan side, since so many on Hutch's side were eliminated, and the Kinahans need to lie low due to law enforcement. Notorious reputation. Gerry Hutch's notoriety comes from 2 distinct eras. The heist era, where he embarrassed authorities by pulling off huge robberies and became a folk figure. He was seen as a smart, maybe even honorable thief, who avoided hurting people and hated drugs. The feud era, where his family became central to an ugly gang war with high body counts and public mayhem, dragging his name into a bloody saga he probably never imagined in his earlier years. The duality is fascinating. On one hand, he's the monk, the guy who tried to leave crime behind and who once ran a limousine service for tourists. On the other, he's the alleged mastermind who struck at the Kinahan cartel and unleashed chaos. There have been books and TV documentaries on Hutch. He's often portrayed with a mix of grudging respect for his past cunning and relative code, and condemnation for the violence associated with the feud. In the annals of Irish crime, Gerry Hutch stands out as a survivor, a man who navigated the criminal world from the old-school robbery days into the modern cartel era and lived to tell the tale. The fact he's still alive and free when so many around him ended up dead or imprisoned adds to his legendary status. It's said that in Gangland, if you make it to old age, you've earned a certain infamy. The monk certainly has. 2. Christy, the dapper Don Kinahan, architect of a global cartel. At number 2 is a name that has become infamous, not just in Ireland, but across Europe and beyond. Christy Kinahan, often nicknamed the Dapper Don. As the founder of the Kinahan organized crime group, commonly known as the Kinahan Cartel, Christy is the godfather of one of the largest drug trafficking networks ever to emerge from Ireland. He's a criminal pioneer of sorts, taking Irish gangland to a transnational level. Under his watch, the Kinahan Cartel became a multi-million euro enterprise, flooding continents with narcotics and engaging in deadly feuds and money laundering on a massive scale. Christy Kinahan was born in 1957 in Dublin, coming from a relatively ordinary background. His father managed a dairy farm and his mother ran a B&B. He wasn't a street thug from the inner city slums. He actually grew up with a bit more comfort and even attended good schools. People who knew him noted he was articulate, well-spoken, qualities that later helped him pose as a legit businessman. Kinahan's first forays into crime were in the 1970s and 80s. He got involved in fraud and forgery schemes, like passing fake checks. He was quite intelligent and used that in white-collar crime initially. However, as Dublin's drug scene exploded in the 1980s, especially with heroin causing havoc, Kinahan saw bigger opportunities. He transitioned into the heroin trade, partnering with or filling the void left by older drug lords like Larry Dunn, the first major heroin boss who was arrested in the mid-80s. In 1986, Kinahan got caught with a stash of heroin and was sentenced to about 6 years in prison. In jail, he rubbed shoulders with other criminals, including some international traffickers, and he learned, networked, and planned. By the time he left prison in the early 90s, Ireland had formed the Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, and was cracking down on big drug dealers post Veronica Guerin's murder. Sensing the heat, Kinahan went international. He moved first to the Netherlands, Amsterdam's infamous drug underworld, and then settled in the Costa del Sol in Spain, which in the 90s and 2000s was becoming the playground of European gangsters. In Spain, Kinahan established himself as a major player. He leveraged contacts from his prison days and started forming a network that could source drugs directly from producers in South America, North Africa, and Asia, and then distribute wholesale across Europe. Cocaine from Colombia, heroin from Afghanistan, via contacts in Pakistan or Turkey. Cannabis resin, hash from Morocco. Kinahan Group dealt in all of it. Key to his model was diversification and professionalism. He recruited people of various nationalities: Spanish money launderers, British and Irish smugglers, Dutch wholesalers, even ex-military guys for logistics. It was like a multinational corporation of crime, which was unusual for an Irish mob figure. He invested in technology and encryption to hide communications, used front companies, and laundered money through property and businesses around the world. His operations spanned Ireland, the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, Dubai, UAE, and even as far as South Africa and Asia. By the mid-2000s, the Kinahan cartel was pumping huge volumes of drugs into Ireland and the UK. They became the main suppliers, effectively sitting at the top of the pyramid, wholesaling to local gangs. This made Kinahan fabulously wealthy, hence the nickname Dapper Don for his allegedly suave style and the perception that he behaved more like a CEO than a street thug. However, unlike John Gilligan or some others, Christie tried to keep his personal footprint small. He wasn't flashy in the public eye. Few photos of him existed for years. He lived in a villa in Marbella quietly, even as container ships and trucks he controlled moved contraband all over. International law enforcement had been tracking Kinahan for years, and in May 2010, a massive joint operation took place. Spanish police, with the help of Irish Garda, the British and Europol, raided Kinahan's villas and properties in Spain and arrested him along with dozens of associates. They seized luxury cars, cash, documents, even small airplanes, a trove of evidence of a huge criminal enterprise. The operation was codenamed Operation Shovel because they intended to dig up the roots of the cartel. Kinahan was detained and questioned. Many thought this was the end of the Kinahan empire. But surprisingly, Spanish authorities did not press major charges. After holding him for a while, they released Kinahan on bail, and the case never went to trial. It's believed Spain tried to build a money laundering case, but it fizzled due to the complexity of evidence and jurisdiction issues. So the Dapper Don walked free, and if anything, Operation Shovel alerted him that he needed a safer haven. Kinahan relocated for a time to Belgium, then eventually found sanctuary in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Dubai, with its no extradition stance for certain countries and a haven for many shady businessmen, became the Kinahan cartel's new HQ from around mid-2010s onward. Christie by this time was aging and reportedly stepped back from day-to-day operations, letting his eldest son, Daniel, take the reins. But the Kinahan name became publicly notorious in Ireland, mainly due to the feud with the Hutch gang, described earlier. While Daniel was a target in that feud, it was Christie's side, his cartel, that was battling the Hutch group. Christie's other son, Christopher Jr., was also involved. The Kinahans were now all household names in Ireland because of the news coverage of the gang war. Although Christie Kinahan himself wasn't on the streets with a gun, he was the patriarch whose decisions, or sometimes inability to control younger hotheads, led to that violent conflict. According to Irish police, Christie tried at one point to mediate a truce after a few killings, reaching out through contacts to broker peace with the Hutch side. But things had gone too far by then, especially after the Regency Hotel incident, which was seen as unforgivable by them. The feud raged, and Christie reportedly sanctioned a lot of the retaliation hits to protect his family's honor and dominance. As the 2010s progressed, Kinahan cartel's sheer scale of crime couldn't stay in the shadows. The US government joined the hunt in 2022, with the US Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, designating the Kinahan cartel as a significant transnational criminal organization. They imposed sanctions on Christie Kinahan, his sons Daniel and Christopher Jr., and several key lieutenants. This meant any assets or bank accounts tied to them in US jurisdiction were frozen, and Americans, including companies, were forbidden from doing business with them. The US also announced, in tandem with Irish authorities, a $5 million reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of Christie or his sons. Suddenly, the Kinahan were in the ranks of top narco-traffickers in the world in terms of being wanted men. This was a huge turning point. The Kinahan went from untouchable jet-setters to very wanted fugitives. Christie, sitting in Dubai, saw longtime allies distancing themselves. In late 2022, even the UAE agreed to go after money linked to the Kinahans, signaling their luxurious sanctuary might not shield them forever. As of the latest, Christie Kinahan remains at large in Dubai, but likely living a quieter life as pressure mounts. There are rumors he considered moving to Africa or Asia to evade Western authorities. At about 68 years old now, he's not in the best health according to some reports. But until he's caught, he remains an official fugitive with a hefty bounty on his head. Christie Dapper Don's notoriety comes from scale of criminal enterprise. No Irish gangster before assembled such a large, complex global drug cartel. He's in the league of cartel bosses and mafia kingpins internationally. His cartel's feud with Hutch family spilled blood on Dublin streets, capturing headlines and public horror. He transformed from a local crook to a global drug lord over decades, outlasting many peers. Being targeted by the US Treasury and having a multi-million reward on him has put his name in international news, making him infamous beyond Ireland. In Irish crime law, Christie Kinahan is the ultimate godfather figure. The once genteel-sounding businessman who reportedly loves fine wine and speaks multiple languages, behind closed doors oversaw murder, mayhem and misery through the drug trade. If one day he's brought to trial, it would be one of the most significant criminal cases Ireland has ever seen. Until then, he sits near the apex of our notorious list, only surpassed by someone very close to him, who we'll discuss next. 1. Daniel Kinahan, the modern crime lord and boxing's shadowy figurehead. And now, at number 1, we come to Daniel Kinahan, the son of Christie Kinahan and the de facto leader of the Kinahan cartel in recent years. If Christie built the empire, Daniel expanded and brazenly promoted it, even mingling with celebrities and the professional boxing elite. Daniel Kinahan is considered the most notorious Irish gangster today because he embodies the contemporary face of organized crime, wealthy, globally connected, and publicly sanctioned at the highest levels. His involvement in a high-profile sport, while allegedly ordering murders in a gangland feud, makes his story particularly astonishing. Heir to a criminal empire, Daniel Kinahan was born in 1977 in Dublin. As the eldest son, he grew up under Christie's wing, witnessing the family business as it grew. When Christie relocated to Spain in the 90s, Daniel eventually joined him there. Daniel isn't known to have had a working-class criminal upbringing the way many others on this list did. He was more of a prince, raised in a criminal court. By his 20s, Daniel was an active participant in his father's operations, helping oversee drug shipments and forging alliances. Daniel lacks the media nickname like his father's Dapper Don, but in some circles he's been dubbed the Irish Godfather. Though that's a title his father really earned, Daniel's more the heir. Unlike the monk or the general, Daniel didn't have a reputation for personally committing robberies or anything. His notability comes from leadership and the feud. Perhaps the most surprising chapter in Daniel Kinahan's life is his foray into professional boxing promotion. Around 2012, based in Marbella, Daniel co-founded a boxing management company called MGM, Macklin's Gym Marbella, with a former boxer, Matthew Macklin. This later rebranded to MTK Global. Under Daniel's guidance, though he often had no official title, MTK Global became a powerhouse in boxing, managing and advising dozens of fighters, including world champions. Daniel befriended superstar boxers and was photographed with them. He was, at one point, praised by heavyweight champion Tyson Fury as the man who got Fury's big fight deals done. This mingling with mainstream sport seemed to be Daniel's attempt to wash his image and maybe have a post-crime career. But it also inadvertently heightened his notoriety because media began asking, who is this Daniel Kinahan popping up in boxing? And soon the ugly truth surfaced in headlines. The Regency close call, a key event tying Daniel to gangland violence, was the Regency Hotel attack in 2016, detailed in Jerry Hutch's section. Daniel was one of the targets that day. He was at the boxing weigh-in that the Hutch hitmen stormed. He barely escaped, reportedly running out a side door or even leaping from a balcony to flee. One of his close friends, David Byrne, was killed there. That incident transformed Daniel. It was an attempt on his life, and from then on, Daniel allegedly took the gloves off, no boxing pun intended, and pushed an all-out campaign against the Hutch faction. Irish police intelligence and later court affidavits allege that Daniel Kinahan personally gave orders to murder Hutch family members and associates in revenge for the Regency and other slights. It said he was a hands-on boss in that regard, demanding blood for blood. The results were the spree of shootings in 2016-2017, making international news. Daniel was now no longer just a discreet smuggler. He was seen as a vengeful Mafia don willing to unleash carnage on Dublin's streets. This, of course, made Daniel Kinahan enemy number one for Irish law enforcement. But complicating matters, he was in Dubai, out of reach, and presenting himself to the world as a mere sports promoter. For a while, he even gave interviews to outlets like the Sunday Independent, through intermediaries, insisting he was an honest businessman, complaining that his reputation was unfairly tarnished. Sanctions and global spotlight, things really heated up in 2020-2022. An Irish court explicitly named Daniel Kinahan as a senior figure in organised crime. A BBC Panorama documentary exposed his boxing involvement, causing a scandal that led MTK Global to publicly cut ties with him, though many say he still was advising behind scenes. Then came the aforementioned US Treasury sanctions in April 2022. The US not only sanctioned him alongside his father, they actually placed a larger reward on Daniel, $5 million for Daniel, and likewise for Christy and Christopher Jr. The reward poster, yes, there's a literal wanted poster, describes Daniel Kinahan as running a cartel that smuggles drugs and guns into Europe and that he has sanctioned murders in the Hutch feud. It's unprecedented for an Irish criminal to be singled out like this by the US government. Once the sanctions hit, the house of cards in boxing fell. Promoters, TV networks, and fighters all had to distance themselves or risk being blacklisted by the US. Many publicly announced they'd no longer work with Daniel Kinahan. The UAE froze bank accounts linked to him. A couple of Kinahan's top men were arrested in Dubai in 2022, though not the Kinahans themselves yet. Also in 2022, a massive drug trafficking trial in Ireland, unrelated to the feud, unveiled how Kinahan's gang was working with cartels to import gigantic cocaine shipments, so his drug business was still booming amidst the feud drama. As of now, Daniel Kinahan remains in Dubai, likely under close watch but not arrested. There are diplomatic talks ongoing between Ireland, US, and UAE about getting Kinahan expelled or prosecuted. If he travels, he risks arrest. So he's somewhat stuck, albeit in a luxurious locale. He reportedly has access to substantial wealth still, but moving or spending it is getting harder under sanctions. There's speculation he could try to run somewhere like Russia or a South American country without extradition, but that's conjecture. What's clear is that Daniel Kinahan's life as a pseudo-celebrity in boxing is over, and he's now more infamous than ever. He's only 47, as of 2025, so presumably still energetic and potentially dangerous if cornered. The Kinahan-Hutch feud is largely dormant now. With Hutch's acquittal and Daniel being hunkered down abroad, open hostilities ceased, at least for the time being. However, the Kinahan cartel still operates, though somewhat hampered. They likely have networks doing business without using the Kinahan name overtly to avoid sanctions. Daniel Kinahan tops this list for several reasons. He currently epitomizes Irish organized crime on the global stage. No other Irish gangster has had a $5 million bounty and been the focus of such international multi-agency pursuit. The audacity of mixing with the legitimate world, sports celebs, while allegedly running a murderous cartel adds to his notoriety. It's very movie-like, the mob boss shaking hands with champions by day and ordering hits by night. His central role in the worst gangland feud in Irish history, in terms of body count and publicity, cements his fearsome reputation at home. Daniel took what his father built and, some say, made it even bigger until the clampdown. He became the face of that empire, willingly or not, thanks to his higher public profile. In short, Daniel Kinahan is the most notorious gangster in Ireland by virtue of being the most powerful, the most internationally wanted, and the one whose actions, both criminal and quasi-legit, have had ripple effects far beyond Ireland's shores. Only time will tell how his story ends, whether he's captured and jailed like so many others on this list, or whether he eludes justice indefinitely. But as of now, Daniel Kinahan stands as Ireland's most notorious gangster, casting a long shadow from Dubai over the Irish crime landscape and indeed the global underworld. These 10 figures, from ruthless enforcers and cunning heist masters to global cartel bosses, together paint a portrait of Ireland's underworld spanning multiple generations. Each in their own way earned infamy. Some, like Martin Cahill or Jerry Hutch, through outsmarting authorities and gaining folk anti-hero status before meeting violent fates or close calls. Others, like John Gilligan or the Dundons, through sheer brutality and the public revulsion they caused that led to major changes in law enforcement approaches. And the Kinahan family, who turned Irish organized crime into a global enterprise, attracting international heat as few could have imagined. Ireland's fight against organized crime has evolved as these gangsters rose and fell. Many of the old guard are now dead or imprisoned. The new era, exemplified by the Kinahans, shows crime has no borders, forcing unprecedented international cooperation to bring them down. Yet, as we've seen, even the most notorious are not invincible. Gangland law shows that every untouchable gangster eventually faces a downfall, whether by assassination, arrest, or betrayal from within. The cycle keeps turning. Today's kingpin can become tomorrow's cautionary tale. What remains constant is the impact these figures have had on Irish society, prompting stronger laws, policing reforms, and sadly, the loss of innocent lives caught in the crossfire of their criminal ambitions. In exposing their stories, we shine a light on the dark chapters they've written. It serves as a reminder that, while crime may sometimes appear to pay handsomely, in the end it exacts an even greater price, on the gangsters, on their victims, and on the community at large.